Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Let's go on a journey together, you and me, a journey through time, looking back at over 15 years of progress, learning and evolution, at how World of Warcraft grew from a new MMO in an emerging gaming market to over a decade later, still one of the biggest and no doubt most successful gaming franchises ever to have existed. What I want to focus on is what each expansion brought to the game, the good, the bad and the downright ugly, which bits were kept and which bits were thrown away and why. How much of vanilla can be seen in BFA or eventually Shadowlands? Of course the best place to start is at the start vanilla, and yes, that's what I'm going to be referring to it as that, since it's not really an expansion in itself, is it? And just to reiterate, this will be about vanilla, not classic, since despite looking very similar, once you get under the hood, the bits that make them work and the people actually playing the game are two quite different things. So let's take a look at what did vanilla bring to World of Warcraft. I think already this is going to be the hardest video to do out of all the versions of the game, simply because this is where it all began, a melting pot of ideas, a time when Blizzard threw ideas at a wall to see what stuck, and fortunately for them they must have been using a Velcro wall or something, because they got a huge amount right from the offset. Not to say Blizzard were trying anything totally new either, the notion of an MMO had been around for a long time before vanilla launched, the likes of Everquest and Lineage II amongst others having huge commercial success at a time when a monthly subscription was the norm for a game of this type. You can see remnants of UI and gameplay being pretty close to what those already making it big were doing, and I feel it's always been a strength of Blizzard to take a good idea and make it even better. Well, at least it was in the past. In fact, vanilla released on the 23rd of November 2004, the same month as Everquest 2, which was on the 8th of November 2004. Bringing a direct and brand new competitor to an established title in a growing market seems like madness by today's standards, but it seems like there was some kind of method in this madness. World of Warcraft quickly outstripped all other MMORPGs and rose to the top of the market, and has retained an iron grip on the claim for 15 years and is still going strong by all accounts. How did Blizzard do it? Well, let's not pretend Blizzard didn't have a great story to build upon. World of Warcraft at the end of the day is a port of an RTS to an MMORPG, taking heavy influence from the condensed story of the Warcraft series and expanding it 100-fold into dozens of zones, cities, towns, races, dungeons and so on. Sometimes you forget to look back and realise that you've spent 2 hours in a zone and then click the map and see a whole world of other zones. The game is absolutely massive in scale. Vanilla upon release was somewhat more of a casual friendly MMO than others at the time, which may sound like crazy talk, but hear me out. Take death mechanics for example. If you died in Lineage 2, you can be resurrected or res at a nearby town, costing you some of the experience you'd earned, scaling up with level. In Everquest, if you died, oh boy, you're in for a bad time. So you're teleported to your bind or Hearthstone location without any of your gear. You lose experience and therefore potentially levels and abilities. You need to then relearn spells and have to go back to where you died, which is often in not a very great place to get your gear, items and gold back. Even in Everquest 2 they changed the resurrection system to be closer to how it ended up being in World of Warcraft, but they still kept the XP loss penalty in place. If you die in RuneScape, you drop all of your gear on the floor and have a few minutes to get back and pick it all up again before other people can take it. Death was a real heart attack moment in real life on that game if you were far away from where you died. In vanilla, you die, you run back, your gear takes durability damage, but more importantly, there's no XP loss, and you don't lose your gear. When you die in World of Warcraft, you're only losing time, not actively going backwards, and most people in real life would choose to avoid losing $50 than to gain $50. Lost aversion made World of Warcraft a bit easier to come back to when things go wrong in game. This combined with a new and fresh art style, great musical composition, and a game that could run well on even a toaster, made World of Warcraft accessible for a huge variety of people, even at a time when gaming was nowhere near as mainstream and being called a nerd was considered a bad thing, not a personality trait. So which bits of vanilla were well received? Well, this is kind of hard to answer because I just want to sort of say most of it. This was the first iteration of the game we ever got, and at this point there's nothing to look back to compare. Everything that Blizzard attempted was fresh and new. Effort and care was put into many areas of the game to make them feel though you're in a whole different world, factors that ended up making the game such a huge success. The small details in inns or shops, having NPCs actively working or just emote talking, it all adds up. And though most of it is in the background, I think it does go some way to making the world around you feel more alive, more lived in. The journey from level 1 to 60 nowadays is so far removed. Even in Classic it took days played. Whereas today you can do 1 to 120 in a matter of hours with enough preparation. Not to say slow for the sake of it is better of course, but that gradual power gain through new abilities and talents and just your own experience made it something very tangible. You were introduced to things at a very slow and steady pace, and there is an enormous amount to learn for a new player for sure, and many people would have gone dozens of levels without a pet as a hunter, totems as a shaman, perhaps running around with broken gear and not realised, and yet they kept on playing. I know I've heard stories about all of these happening. When something is new, you often just take it at face value and adapt yourself to suit it rather than assume it's you that's doing something wrong. And at the end of the day, when you realise that you could have a pet as a hunter, it would absolutely blow your mind for levelling after that. Those pushing for content at endgame were really put on a pedestal then, and for good reason. The chasm of game knowledge between now and then is practically immeasurable. We have more knowledge of best in slot gear, raid mechanics, better add-ons, talent choices, computers, internet, even voice comms are so much more commonplace and accessible these days. Saying I can't get on Discord isn't really something you hear. This meant that when you saw that guy in full tier gear, chilling at the side of the bridge between Ironforge mailbox and auction house, you were in the presence of an internet god. Of course, many people went without ever seeing an epic at all, with rare quality items already being a prize from endgame dungeons or long quest series. The raiding scene was all about scale, Blizzard taking the bold approach of 40-man raiding, aiming to get as many bodies in there to see what awesome content they had created, and it paid off big time. This was changed down the line, and I did talk about it in a video actually, as the Burning Crusade downsized to 25-man maximum in raids, but for vanilla, this seemed like a well-received formula. What about class design then? Arguably one of the most important things in your MMO is how does your class feel, how does it play? And to this end, I believe Blizzard did a very good job, and although there were many bugs early, that's something that comes with the territory of trying something new, especially when there are so many interactions between characters that 100 QA testers might never think of. Class quests, in my opinion, were great and should have been a part of every expansion. Getting your first pet as a hunter, learning new totemic skills as a shaman, unlocking berserker stance at Frey Isle as a warrior, or finally receiving your whirlwind axe, a weapon that you can use for dozens of hours whilst being near irreplaceable, learning new forms for druids, demons as warlocks, or even getting an epic quality weapon as a priest or a hunter. Quest did so much to just make you feel a bit more like your class was supposed to, and I believe classes themselves overall felt very good to play, and pretty much fit into the category of what you can expect when you pick it on the character create screen. Warriors can wield nearly every single weapon, apart from wands, though to be honest it would be hilarious to see a warrior pulling with a wand. Druids are versatile and very akin to nature, even becoming animals themselves. Rogues play dirty, focus on disabling their opponents, and as a mage you can blast anyone to bits from miles away. The abilities you have add much to this as well. Of course, in vanilla everything is new, so it's kind of hard to focus and talk about one subset of things in particular. Arguably, there have been improvements from later expansions, but vanilla had so many flavour spells, things I bet you hardly ever use, but they were there because that's what your class should be able to do. Disarming traps as a rogue, Eyes of the Beast as a hunter, Sentry Totem as a shaman, Sense Demons as a warlock. Many of these things were cut out later down the line in the name of pruning and making things more streamlined, which is a shame considering it's a pure loss of something that was doing no harm. On top of this, the talent system was very good for the time, and as it evolved throughout Classic and builds became more meta, it became apparent why the formula worked. Having certain big talents at the 10, 20, 30 talent point mark in a tree made decision making as to where to put those points to get those key abilities more engaging. It made it more of a choice and was more important for you on your character. Even today, with many builds being figured out, there are still deviations based upon choice of what you prefer. As we'll see later on with the series, there was certainly some logic behind Blizzard changing talents to 1 per 15 level, and it's true that 1% extra crit isn't exactly the most exciting, but getting 1 point closer to that new ability definitely is. Don't forget about the unique events vanilla had either, usually coming with a new raid tier. Blizzard wanted everyone to know about it, leading to some results somewhere in between epic, awesome, and hilarious. the first being the Blood Plague from Zul'Gurub. Okay, this one was unintentional, but on the Hakar fight there was a debuff, Blood Plague. It dealt some damage and passed on to players or NPCs in near proximity. And if your pet was hit by it as a hunter and you dismissed it, it retained the debuff. Pop along to a major city, summon your pet as it happily infects everything around with this debuff, which spreads like wildfire through high population areas, with guards carrying it around and low level players being instantly killed off. Eventually leading to Blizzard having to fix this so the debuff could not be carried outside ZG, since the major cities like Ironforge or Orgrimmar could become pretty unplayable at peak times with just a sea of skeletons. Funnily enough, Blizzard recreated this kind of epidemic prior to Wrath of the Lich King, as we will get around to seeing one day. Next up was the opening of the Gates of AQ and the war effort. No matter your level or raid experience, you could contribute to the war through a massive shopping list of turn-ins. In fact, when the gates opened had no timer, it was decided by how fast your server completed all of these turn-ins, as well as a truly epic questline eventually leading to the much coveted Black Battle Tank mount. When all was said and done, the gong was sounded, forces poured out from AQ onto the onlooking masses in Silithus, and the war began. Known as the 10-hour war, massive animated statues of Obsidian and Karaji soldiers were eventually felled and players were able to access the temple and ruins of AQ. If that isn't a cool way to start a raid, I don't know what is. In fact, Blizzard did something quite similar upon the release of Naxxramas with the Scourge invasion. Now this was kind of similar, but it had a limited time and was split up a bit more, since having the whole server in Silithus was pretty laggy, to be fair, with battles taking place across many zones and eventually the capital cities of the Horde and Alliance. Once again, Blizzard wanted the whole player base to know the threat that Azeroth was facing. This connecting even those who were realistically never going to see the actual raid content still got you more involved and added that level of hype, sometimes missing from raid tiers today. Just a short segue to BFA with the current raid tier taking on the old god N'Zoth, who has supposedly attacked Azeroth, but very specifically in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms in Pandaria and Uldum from Cataclysm. There's a high chance you would never know if you didn't seek out the content. This is for an old god too, it could have been so much more. Back on track for vanilla now. What parts of the game were not so well received then? Because I just went through a whole long list of positives. Not everything ended up being so popular. There were certainly some gameplay systems that were less preferred or more controversial. First up, class balance. Whilst the classes themselves felt great to play, when it came to competition and performing, some classes were a purebred racehorse and others were a lame mule. The actual gap between top and bottom for performance was immense. And this wasn't just for DPS either, this carried across for tanks and to a certain extent for the healers. Now hear me out here, because I believe Blizzard may have done something rather clever. The majority of people want to do damage. Literally every game I've ever played, there is a constant demand for more people to fill the supporting roles. Vanilla of course had several classes that could heal, all of whom also had a damage dealing specialization. Throughout the duration of Classic, especially in raiding content, the tier gear thrown their way was dedicated to healing, and for each of these hybrid classes, the DPS spec couldn't compete with a mage pressing Frostbolt, almost no matter what level of effort was put in. I think Blizzard may have put that extra mile into encouraging people to become healers for raids by way of tier gear, and also not wanting classes that could fulfill several roles to be as effective as a class that could only do one, apart from warriors of course. This became known as the hybrid tax, the idea that the more roles your class could fulfill overall, the less well it should perform when compared to a class that can only do one role. And it kind of does make sense. Imagine if Retribution Paladins and Rogues swapped how much damage they could deal. Why would you ever want a Rogue in your group when they contribute so little damage and utility compared to a Beast Rep Pally blasting the DPS as well as providing massive buffs for his allies and healing? This philosophy, if you can call it that, was binned in later expansions, but maybe for just vanilla it made sense. Next up, the talent respec cost. Now this one is a bit dividing for me, to be honest. On one hand, I like the fact that in vanilla you are a fire mage, you're a restoration druid, you're an arms warrior, you're not just X class. Your talents very much lock you into what expectations I will get when grouping with you as a player. It goes a bit further to solidify class identity. Also this was done so you can't, for example, in one day go from max efficiency gold farming spec to PvP spec to PvE spec as certain classes like a mage. You have to choose what you want from the game. It's just a shame that the method of doing this is locked behind an in-game paywall, a very expensive in-game paywall. Exploring your talents is great, but just so restricted behind this system, with a respec starting off at 1 gold and going up to 50 gold, gradually reducing over time. 50 gold back then was some serious cash to just throw at a trainer. It made you really consider whether it was worth it. It would have been good if you got a free respec every couple of days or perhaps once a week, and if you wanted to respec again before the cooldown is up, then you have to pay for it. This would have allowed a bit more freedom to explore your talent tree without allowing people to go crazy with it. Finally, the ranking and honor system. Now, as you may have heard from my previous videos, I'm not exactly a fan of this system, but I don't think I'm being overly biased here since Blizzard got rid of it at the start of TBC. It's an interesting concept for sure, competing against others in your own faction in order to get the best rewards available. It just leads to some pretty unhealthy activities, in-game and out. The issue isn't necessarily locking gear behind a rank, it's just the method in which the ranks are earned is pretty backwards in my opinion. Ranking is a competition and the winner is the person who does it for the longest. Imagine a race where the winner is the person who runs the furthest before collapsing, a race that has no endpoint. That's the ranking system. Time being the key metric encourages botting, account sharing, and day in day out 18+ hour sessions to reach the top, and frankly the honor system is really complicated and confusing to try and get your head around as a new player. You have the percentage cutoffs that you can calculate, bracket stacking, bracket breaking, honorable kills, dishonorable kills, honor earned, ranking points, weekly standing. It's just so convoluted and unintuitive, whereas in TBC it's do PvP, get honor, buy rewards with said honor, done. It seems like a system I can get behind personally, and most importantly it allows people to do it at a pace of whatever they want. You can still know life and get the rewards fast, but you can do a few battlegrounds a week and still have access to the best rewards in the long term, as opposed to the ranking system which makes it literally impossible to get PvP armors without serious time commitment, let alone the PvP weapons. Overall, vanilla sets the groundwork, the foundations of World of Warcraft that's still going today, and whilst not without issues, it certainly ticked many boxes. Enough boxes to see the player base constantly rise and Blizzard take over the whole market for the MMO RPGs. Vanilla lasted a little over 2 years, and on the 16th of January 2007, the Dark Portal finally opened, leading the brave heroes of Azeroth onto a beautiful alien world, filled with new challenges and new content. So join me next time as we take the next step and we look at what did the Burning Crusade bring to World of Warcraft. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.